Good morning, and thank you for joining us here on the Morning Medical Update. I'm Jessica Lovell. It is summer, and just like many of you, we are working hard to bring you some fun and exciting shows come fall. This morning, we are bringing you a rebroadcast of one of our favorite shows. If you have any questions, please leave them below. We will answer them during our live broadcasts on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So sit back and enjoy this Best of Morning Medical Update. Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, January 13th. Welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Thanks for joining us here on Facebook and on YouTube. We know COVID does not just affect your lungs. It can affect all parts of your body, like your heart, your brain, and this can happen way after you have recovered from the virus. COVID survivors with these conditions are what we have called long haulers. And today we are going to update you on one man's COVID journey and his long hauler status. We'll get to your questions as this COVID surge continues. It is far from over. We're going to talk about what lies ahead for the Metro as hospitals battle staffing and supply shortages. We have a couple of good updates for you. That is good news. So make sure to get your questions sent in to us on YouTube, Facebook, and the Medical News Network. You can find those links right there on your screen. But let's take a look at our COVID count this morning. We've got Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control, Dr. Dana Hawkinson. Good morning to you.
Hi.
Hi.
The active infections, 115, 24 patients in the ICU, and 19 of those on the ventilator. We still have 51 in that recovery period. Of those 115 active infections, 14 are fully vaccinated. We did have a death over the last 24 hours on the 12th. That patient was not vaccinated, so I think that brings our number of deaths to maybe 16 or 17. I don't remember what our count was yesterday, but certainly one more from yesterday. But that is, again, just we haven't even reached really the middle part of January, so a lot of deaths so far.
And Dr. Seitz, you do have some.
I do. I just a couple good news points. So yesterday we talked a little bit about how the numbers in New York City had started to crest and come down, and in Boston, and now that's becoming more widespread in the Northeast. So I think what we thought yesterday was maybe hope is clearly emerging more strongly as a pattern of hope today. Our numbers are down slightly. Don't know what that means yet because we need a couple days in a row to know if that's just a blip or a trend. But the numbers in Boston and New York and other places in the Northeast are clearly dropping. And really importantly, the wastewater testing for the Omicron burden is really down. It's like down by 60% in Boston. So that really suggests that we are looking just like South Africa, this really rapid ascent, lots of compromise, lots of challenges because of that. But that rapid of a decline is faster than what we really see in wastewater testing, which suggests the Omicron numbers are going to start dropping across the country more and more. We probably, unlike some of the others where we were about 2 to 4 weeks behind the Northeast, we were only behind about 7 to 10 days, which means we may be hitting our peak or be seeing our peak in the next few days, which would be really great news to all of us, I think, to think that really we might be seeing a drop. And I can't sing the song Some Kind of Wonderful, but it does feel like some kind of wonderful to have a little bit right here in your
it's
right
going
there,
on in your head right
mentally. Well, but mentally, just a little bit of good news amongst
Yeah.
all the difficult news we've seen and all the deaths and the challenges to our staff, the people being so mentally exhausted at the bedside. Nothing will make us feel better than to watch those declines happen.
And a couple questions from our viewers yesterday were just, is there any good news you can give us? Please tell me something's happening that's moving the needle somewhere.
That's really good news. This thing is good news, just to say. It's really been very clear now that Omicron in triply vaccinated people is so much more mild. And so to those of you that have been triply vaccinated, wow, you're going to be okay. Hawk.
What's your good news?
Yeah, it has to do with the vaccine. It has to do with really our body's immune system, and it's those T cells, and certainly the early basic science research out of South Africa would show that those T cells continue, although the antibody evasion and the antibodies that don't work so well, even for vaccinated people who've received 2 doses, we know that the T cell responses continue to remain intact. They aren't decreased as much, and so that will help protect you from hospitalization and severe disease as well.
Okay, we have a little bit more good news this morning. And before we get to our reporter questions, 3 Johnson County cities have now approved indoor face mask mandates. That's Roland Park, Mission, Prairie Village. These city leaders gave the thumbs up last night to require masking in all restaurants and stores, retail areas. So if you don't have a mask, you may even get a fine for this one. But the cities, they say they're attributing the 31% positivity rate in Johnson County and also the CMOs gathering right here throughout our area and across the state for helping them to get to this decision.
Yeah,
I know it's
great.
just 3 cities, but what does that tell us and how could it help?
You know, it every bit helps, right? Every bit helps, and I think the sooner they enforce that, the better, with the understanding that this may not be real, like some of the other mask mandates had to last for a long time. If Omicron can really drop, and you really want to protect folks, we can maybe get through this pretty quickly. So I thank these folks. This is great news, and we hope a few other folks in locales will follow it, because the more protection we have, the safer we'll be, and the safer your hospitals will be. And we can get back to doing some of these surgeries in cases we've had to defer. And just to say, if you see our list, and we should try and produce the list of what we've deferred so we keep talking about it, but these are not cases that you want to defer. You know, maybe there's a few hernia repairs in there, but the reality is these are people who are having to be admitted post-operatively. So that's not a simple hernia repair. That's a bigger, more major surgery, including some cancer surgeries that have been deferred. So those are not things you really want to do. So the help that all of this helps us do better, right? We've heard about the death rate in the emergency rooms throughout Kansas in the month of December being 5 times what it normally is, and I think January is going to probably paint a worse picture. So when we start doing things to help protect each other in society, then we're going to help take care of each other for those more serious times too. So thanks to those folks, because that's great news.
Yes, every little bit helps.
Every
we love
bit
that.
does.
I just want to quickly introduce Dr. Leslie Spikes. She's here with us today. She's popped up on our screen, and I wanted to formally introduce you. How are you today? She's one of our
thank you.
pulmonologists here at the health system, and also credited for creating our long hauler clinic. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How
Good.
are you?
Yeah, very, very good. So how are things going in the long haul clinic, and are you discovering anything new? What could you update us on for that?
Well, the long haul clinic has certainly gotten busier as the months have gone on, you know, and probably will even get busier as this new surge of Omicron recedes. So we are very, very busy in the post-COVID clinic as well.
All right, we are going to, I've got many questions for you, but I want to introduce you to someone. Well, first of all, I'm going to give you a few stats, and then we're going to get to Anil here in just a moment, but more than 1 in every 3 COVID-19 patients become long haulers. That's according to American and British researchers who analyzed health records of more than 270,000 COVID patients, 150 post-COVID patients per month. We can move through that. Those are long haulers. They need services in their recovery. 26% patients needing rehabilitation, 23% need pulmonary services, also needing other services like neurology, even psychiatry. One long hauler that we know very well, Anil Gharmalkar. I said that.
You
yes.
did. I know.
So Anil, we just call him
It took me a while.
Anil, and we're so glad to see his face today. You have met him before on our show. He is a father, a husband. He's a trucking business owner who first got COVID back in April of 2020. He developed severe breathing issues in post-COVID recovery. He now has a permanent trach. It is the only thing now helping him to breathe. This has changed his life forever, as you can imagine. And we're going to talk to him live here next. But here is his backstory. Anil Gharmalkar tested positive for COVID-19 in mid-April, a diagnosis that he is still fighting after multiple hospital stays, medication, and now a tracheotomy. The virus came on suddenly with severe fatigue and issues with his breathing.
Initially, I thought it was just pneumonia or allergies, but my breathing was really shallow.
The father of 9 was overall healthy with well-managed diabetes, but COVID-19 rapidly sent him to the ICU.
They were pretty clear that, my time was very limited.
Doctors prepared him to be transferred to the University of Kansas Health System.
It was just too early. We had way too many plans left and way too much we still wanted to do.
Anil was put on a ventilator to be transferred because doctors didn't think he'd survive the 2-hour commute to the hospital. Anil spent a week on the ventilator, many weeks in the hospital, and countless follow-up visits, including a couple of trips to the ER. Doctors say it could take up to a year to recover, and perhaps not fully.
I wish I would have taken more precautions.
Joining us actually from the road this morning. He's back to work, which was something I know that you wanted to do. You're joining us from your 18-wheeler. Is that right, Anil?
Yeah, I'm in one of them today. We've had the same struggles I think everyone's had with drivers getting sick the last month or so.
So
I think
you're
we've
pitching in to
averaged
help.
one or two. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I ask you how you're doing today? It's been almost a year and a half, I think, since we first spoke with you and told that story. How are you physically doing today?
I'm actually a lot better. I think for me, one of the largest hurdles to get over was breathing. We discovered that when we were getting ready for some surgeries that I had about 50% of my lung function loss. And when we were able to find a way to manage that, it made things a lot, brought things where I could do more of what I wanted to do in life.
How's life changed for
Made
you,
it
though,
easier.
since how has it changed for you since you were diagnosed? What have been some of your bigger challenges?
Honestly, just recovering was the bigger challenge. And leaving the hospital, I was thinking about that, and I talked to my wife quite a bit, and, it broke into phases. For me, it was really hard, about a week after, because we really were under the impression that, there was either A or B. You were either sick or you were well. And to steal from Dr. Stykes, there's much more of a continuum of health. And when you leave intensive care like that, you start on the bottom end of that continuum and have to fight to get your way back. For us, that first 3 months was more of a fight to stay alive. And then the following year and a half was a fight to figure out what life was going to be afterwards.
Yeah, because there was a waiting period to find out how things were going to go. And I want to bring in Dr. Stykes and Dr. Spikes because I feel like Anil's one of the first long haulers that we really kind of dove into.
We talked to, yeah. And I think he had a tracheal injury because he was on the ventilator with such high pressures, and you know him too, right?
Yes.
You're familiar
Yeah,
with the story.
you've been to Dr. Spud with him too.
Is
but
this
he had a lot
unusual?
of trouble. Well, I mean, it can happen with any sort of critical illness.
It can, and unfortunately, the patients that have been in the ICU with COVID, no, it's not unusual for them if they've been on the ventilator long enough that they need a trach as well.
So tell us a little bit about what the trach does, because I want to ask Anil how that's been, because I know he had one temporarily and he didn't know if he was going to need one permanently. We now know he does need one permanently. What is life like for someone with a trach?
I think he can certainly speak to that much more than I can, but it is where people breathe. That is how he is able to breathe because of the trach, and it's a foreign object, in your body, then more at risk for infections, and it's just a new way of life, like he said, to try to learn to live with.
And I know you've
I
had.
think the challenge is that when you have a lot of pressure you're pushing into a lung, that air can escape around the tube that puts the pressure in. There's what's called a cuff on the bottom of it. It's a little balloon. You blow the balloon up, and the harder the ventilator has to work frequently, the more you have to blow the balloon up. And as you do that, you can cause injury to the area around it. It's really not a choice because you don't have a choice. If you don't blow the balloon up enough, you don't get the pressure in the lung, and then you can't get enough oxygen into your lung. And the pressure helps push the air into the body, so to speak. And in this case, especially with severe COVID, it takes a lot of pressure sometimes. And we know that can cause a lot of lung damage and cause damage to the airway and damage where that cuff is, and that's where most people get in trouble. And then you get a scar, and it gets smaller. You try and dilate it. That works in mild cases. In more severe cases, it doesn't. Then you try to resect that part of the trachea. But if it's been a big enough injury, you can't do that. And unfortunately, there's no way to replace a trachea right now. I mean, some people have tried tracheal transplants. Those don't go very well. And they've tried to manufacture a trachea. That doesn't work very well. Trachea is a remarkable part of your body, and how specialized and how important it is to get the air in and out. And that's what happened with Anil. He had this big injury, and there's no way to physically or surgically address it.
That was my next question: is what are the other options? Certainly, there have to be other options, and it just
Anil's
seems like
been
they
all over the country
aren't.
looking for options, right?
So,
Anil?
Anil, I know last time we spoke to you, your voice has changed quite a bit. You sound much better than the last time we spoke with you. How are you feeling, and how are you managing life with the trach?
I think it's just becoming part of our daily process. I mean, my wife has taken over a lot of it. I mean, kudos to her. Not medically trained, but she does most of my trach changes. I think in the early, I think what do they call it, a fresh trach, it's a lot more dramatic. It's a lot goopier. There's a lot more blood and mucus. I think it's still not the cleanest thing in the world, but it's far more manageable now than it was then.
Dr. Spikes, what are we learning about long haulers? I mean, it just seems like we kind of get updated, you know, as we turn new quarters in the pandemic, but anything new that we're learning about as far as symptoms go?
I think that we're trying, and there's a lot of research going on about why some patients develop these longer symptoms, especially those that, have the more mild form of illness. They can have prolonged symptoms as well than those that have been in the hospital. And so there's some theories that maybe an autoimmune process is triggered, or perhaps there are viral particles still circulating that are causing kind of this ongoing inflammation. But all of that, again, is still lots of research to be done.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Please do.
So, and just first of all, a statement for those of you that believe that Omicron is just a cold and that it's so much more mild, be careful, because remember that the other COVID, a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of long haul folks have very mild or no symptoms, and yet they still get the long haul syndrome. So don't get deluded by the idea that I should go get Omicron because it's so mild and I'll have all this immunity, because you could end up like Anil Gharmalkar or other long haul patients. So just be thoughtful, folks. Omicron is not Omicron.
I completely agree. A lot of the long haul patients we see in our post-COVID clinic are patients that maybe weren't that sick initially, but they're having persistent fatigue, shortness of breath, lots of symptoms months after their initial infection.
And do the vaccinated patients get it very much?
There's a mixed bag of studies out there too about that. Initially, there were some out there that said maybe the vaccine did not necessarily help for long haul symptoms, but then there's been others out that said yes, the vaccine may protect against it as well too.
Dr. Stites, do you have any questions? I'm looking through all of our great questions from our
you bet.
community. You have some for Anil and Dr. Stites.
Anil, so let me just ask you this. It is a continuum. You mentioned that first. And second of all, thanks for being back, and thanks for being such a great person and telling your story repeatedly. Do people ever stop and recognize you now?
Fortunately, no.
That's good.
I still blend in the background.
So tell us, what a great thing that you are able to get back out and drive. I know that's got to feel good to you. What else? Tell us about what parts of your life you've been able to reclaim. What parts of life have you had to say, yeah, I may not get back there?
Obviously, anything too physical is still a bit of a stretch at times. But traveling for us was a big deal. And, chasing my wife, she's very motivated when we're traveling. She expects us to put about 50 to 70 miles on our feet anytime we go somewhere. And we had made a trip to Disney World when I was on steroids, and I was able to keep up. And when I came off them, before we figured out the lung problem, I couldn't get up the stairs again. And to me, that was kind of devastating. So for us, we did a trip for Christmas to New York City, and we're able to get up and down through the whole city. And I think the kids said we logged about 15 miles. So I know I've gotten enough of my lung capacity back that I'm pretty happy, or lung function. I'm pretty ecstatic with that. Swimming is obviously out. Water sports are out. I'm not quite brave enough to go on a cruise.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
And Anil, I know you also said one of your big things was you wanted to get back to Disneyland. You said that was one of your favorite, or Disney World. Don't do that either right now, right?
Well, not during the Omicron surge. Don't do that.
You can do
Someday.
that.
Don't do that now. Not right now.
But is Anil considered
Listen to it,
immunocompromised, though? I mean,
He's immunochallenged because
Okay.
he's got this trach, and so one of your big defenses in your body is your upper airway, your nose, your mouth. There's all sorts of ways of trying to filter out viral or other infectious particles. When you have a hole in your neck, it goes right into your lung, and so you're always going to be immunochallenged by that.
Okay.
And so we would call him immunocompromised, yes, but it's also just a challenge to life, I think.
I've got a couple of questions coming in for our guests from our community, so let's just go ahead and get to those right now. But Chris has a question. Dr. Spikes, any good treatment for long haul fatigue? We get that question a lot.
There's not any specific medicine treatment, but our rehab doctors have done and team have done such a good job about getting patients in to see them and kind of have a graded physical therapy rehab program that I've seen a lot of patients say has really helped a lot.
Okay, so Janet Anil says, Anil, you look great. And thank you again for sharing your story with us. Continued prayers to you and your family. People on our feed all kind of talk to each other and know Anil, so they're always looking out for each other. But another question is about masking. Joanne wants to know, Anil, how you wear a mask. That's not an issue for you, right? And do you always wear a mask?
Probably not as much as I should. I make more of an effort to avoid people, to be honest. And I just wear it over my mouth. It's not... If I cover it up too much, I really start to have trouble breathing.
Well, and there's different filters for trachs. Do you wear a filter in your trach? Do you wear, what kind of cap do you have at the end of that trach?
I just have a speaker valve on right now.
Yeah, but even the speaker valve should offer, I think, some
Okay, tell us what that
protection.
means. Do you have to have some sort of... I feel like you almost have to have a mask over that to protect the infection. And by that, I mean filter.
In a way, but a speaking valve is a valve that caps over the end of the tracheostomy tube, so that patients can actually be able to speak. Otherwise, it's very hard to speak around a trach if you don't have that particular valve.
So you may inhale through the valve, but the valve itself is a bit of a filter, and then when you exhale, it's going to go out through your mouth, so it goes past your vocal cords. Most of this gets into more about physics, and people are going to want to know. But when you're in this part of the trach and you take a breath in, you may close off your trach. When you're in your chest wall, and you take a breath in, you actually expand your trach. So it's all about. This sounds weird, but it's the way our bodies are designed. So when folks are breathing out, they can usually breathe out through the narrowed area. They can't breathe in through the narrowed area. So you can have this valve. The valve's basically a one-way valve, and you can breathe in through it. You exhale, it goes past it. For people with really severe disease, or people who've had to have their larynx removed for cancer or something, then there's a complete closure, and then you can't do that, and they're especially at risk.
Ashley is curious, does this hinder your eating at all?
Fortunately, no. I was really lucky. It was only breathing and speaking. I think because there's 3 functions of your vocal cords. I only lost the breathing.
Joellen Anil, she says that you're an inspiration to her. My very best to you and your family. So I hope you're feeling the love from viewers this morning. Deb wants to know, what percentage would you say, Dr. Spikes, is there of long hauler patients?
Unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, because it seems like a fairly high percentage, and anywhere from 10 to 30% of patients that have had COVID have symptoms beyond 8 to 12 weeks.
And for those who don't understand what long hauler is, tell us kind of the gamut of what people could experience.
Sure. So lots of different symptoms that persist for a long time. Shortness of breath is a common one. The fatigue, especially what we've now called brain fog, so having difficulty thinking and concentrating. Weakness, exercise intolerance, depression, sleep problems. I mean, there's a very long list of symptoms that can persist.
So can we just say these guys have gotten so busy that before we were always saying make an appointment, make an appointment, make an appointment. Now it's getting harder because we have so many folks in the long haul clinic, and we have tons of providers involved with it. I think what we're going to see is this is Hawkeyes. This is going to become a chronic disease because so many people have been affected by COVID. There's going to be a lot of long haul out there for a long time, Hawk.
Yeah, that's exactly. This is going to add to that morbidity or those medical conditions that people are already being seen for. And again, as we get a larger population and an aging population, this is going to continue. And this has been brought up several times in forums, in the news media, certainly in the CDC. We know this is going to be a large burden on healthcare. This is an extremely large burden for you as an individual if you have those issues, and so it is vitally important to address these things. But just as Dr. Spike said, the bulk of the evidence right now would suggest that vaccination does help decrease your risk of long haul.
That was my next question. Thanks for answering that. Bridget wants to know what treatments might be available for one who is 90 days post-COVID who continues to cough excessively.
I would say initially, please, see your provider and make sure that, there's nothing else, whether it's a chest x-ray or some other type of workup that needs to be done after 90 days. And then I really think you need to talk to a physician or someone to really kind of tailor to what treatment might be options for you. It's hard for me to speak about that without a little more information.
Tell us a little bit about the Long Haul Clinic, how it started, how it's all come together, kind of where it started and where it is today.
I think we recognized, and a whole team, everyone kind of recognized early on that, the patients that had COVID, whether it was a mild case or even in the severe cases, were going to have these persistent symptoms. And so we all thought maybe it would be better to try to get a specialist together, because it does seem to run a gamut of, it's not just lung problems, it's the brain fog, it's everything. And so we thought that trying to get a team of specialists together, including our primary care colleagues, and to try and manage these patients as a team was something that would be beneficial.
Nancy has a question. Is an itchy rash that moves around the body a long haul symptom?
It could be. Could be.
Could almost anything be a long haul symptom? That's what I'm starting to wonder.
Could be, yes. Yes.
Well, if you have COVID, from now on, you're always going to wonder.
And that's the struggle we face, and that's why people say, well, the vaccine caused this or COVID caused this. And the reality is there's a backdrop of diseases that occur all the time that we can't explain. Something like that, which sounds like what we would call chronic urticaria or hives. That can occur for a lot of reasons. Now, some people are like, well, does it happen after the vaccination? Does it happen after COVID? Could be.
Could be.
But the problem is that people immediately associate it with, because they say, well, I've had COVID, or I hear I've had the vaccine, and now I have this, therefore the vaccine caused it. Well, okay, but what about all the people that got this but didn't have COVID or didn't have the vaccine? They still get this. So why is it necessary? And that's what you then try and study and see is, okay, in the vaccinated population, and you have to look at by vaccine, and then, or in the COVID patients, you have to look at by variant too. Is there a higher incidence of this, whatever this may be, than there is in the general population, right? And then we can say, okay, there's an increased incidence. That type of information takes years to come up with. You can't just turn on, we're also information hungry in the tech age, but the reality is you may be information hungry, but you're going to be answer empty. And that answer empty may be the way for things are for a while.
I think it will be a long years before we truly understand what post-COVID is, what causes it, and was it even related to COVID?
Right.
To begin
So
with.
here's a story. 1985. I was a doctor in 1985.
Wow.
Let's talk about that. I mean, a long time ago.
I was just a baby.
So fourth year. Yeah, you're a baby, whatever. So, I was at a bedside of a patient who had this very strange disease we couldn't explain, and so now what we call transverse myelitis. We thought it was virus, and we didn't know it could be viral induced back then. But you lose function at a level of your spinal cord. Well, flash forward now, we have a pretty good understanding. HIV causes transverse myelitis. It's an outcome of AIDS. We hadn't even really described AIDS well back in '85. That goes back to the band played on. But then what happened, and so the guy couldn't possibly get all the right therapy and treatment. Once we understood that indeed this is a manifestation of HIV, and you guys hear me relate to the HIV era a lot because that's the last major pandemic humanity's had. And so now we know there are all these really other types of outcomes besides breathing problems that HIV patients have, and so. But at first we said, well, it's a breathing problem. It's a pneumonia. Well, no. Then it became a cancer, and then it became a neurologic disease, and then it became. There's just so many mental health disease, and we understand the full spectrum of the impact, and sometimes that takes years to describe, and that's what we're finding, I think, with COVID, is there's this full spectrum of problems, and we focus so much on you're going to die from it. Well, maybe not, but maybe you are going to suffer from it for a very long time.
Hey, Anil, I know you must get a ton of questions. What do you hear? What kind of message do you share with people about getting vaccinated, staying safe? Do you share the word, spread the word?
Yeah, I think I did early on. I think me and my wife have kind of retreated to a point where we take care of our home and our house and kind of and worry about that now. I try and stay out of the conversation as much.
Are you kind of isolated? Do you feel like you've been isolating, or are you, has this kind of changed you? Obviously, your social activities are much different, I'm sure, but just lifestyle wise.
I think we've just become really fatigued with the conversation. It's gotten repetitive and old, and I'm just a little, tired of the tone of the conversations that have been going on.
What do you mean by tone? I'm curious.
Well, you're not going to convince people with numbers, or you're not going to convince them, because even when I would express, hey, this is what happened to me, you ought to take the vaccine just to avoid some of that potential. The response a lot of times is, well, that was you. We think it's blown out of proportion. We believe it's not real. I think my most unfavorite comment was, well, if the doctors would have treated you correctly, this wouldn't have happened. Or this is all a problem with the ventilator, or this is, it goes down the gambit. And I think we're just tired of the political drama and the stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah,
and so we've kind of made a point just not to participate. I mean, the girls are virtual as far as their schooling goes. They actually prefer it, of all things. And we somewhat retreated a little bit and just decided, we got vaccinated and we're not going to participate in the pandemic. We're just going to stay away from it.
Wow.
I mean, that's probably not the best social answer, but I heard a friend of mine that was a nurse that posted something, and I thought it was really salient. She said, everyone wants to get back to normal, but no one wants to do anything to get there.
That's pretty good.
Well,
there are days we feel like that, Anil. Yeah.
Well, I think what I like first of all, thanks for your candor and being honest about it. And it's unfortunate because I think you're right. We see somebody like Anil and we're thinking, great, he wants to be out there and tell everybody, to get vaccinated and to stay safe. And, you don't want to be like me, but I get it. I hear him saying, I'm over it. I'm done kind of being that person. If you can't look at what I've gone through and make a good decision based on that, I don't know what to tell you at this point. But it's unfortunate to hear people who said, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it being politicized.
It's what we said the other day. It's the problem is that we've decided each other is the enemy instead of having the virus be the enemy. And if we had made that decision, we could do really well. But because we've decided each other is the enemy and there's so much anger about it, then it's hard to have an honest conversation. And instead, you end up trying to have a conversation with made-up information. And when people, to Neil's point, when people just decide they're going to believe the made-up information, what occurs is a conversation that can't really even start. And I think that's the challenge we face. And for those of us that have to live in the reality of it, the frustration and the mental exhaustion for our teams is that whereas once you were a hero, now by telling the truth, you're a villain and you're the enemy. And that is just morally so bankrupt. It's just so wrong. I like to think of myself as a Christian. I'm a New Testament kind of guy, and I just think for those people out there that would say, what would Jesus do? It's like, yeah, I don't think he would deny the facts. I don't think he would villainize the people that are trying to save you. And I don't think he would take people like Anil and try to blame it on him or on somebody else. Just being open and honest to the truth is the key. And too many people have already got their minds made up. And what's happened, again, is we've each become the enemy as opposed to making the virus as the enemy. Right? That's really the story here. The virus is the enemy. When my kids were young, actually, when I was younger, and my nephew and a good friend were down canoeing the Ozarks. It was in January. And the wind was blowing really hard, right? And so these two guys, they're like both about 14 or something like that. They weren't handling the wind very well. We're out on the river in January. And so they just got up and they started yelling at each other. And pretty soon they stood up to have a fight about it. And of course the canoe tipped over and they got wet and it was freezing cold. We got them to the bank. We made them change their clothes, blah, blah, blah. And I said to them, guys, you forget, the two of you are not the enemy. The wind's the enemy. You got to figure out how to make this work with the wind. And remember, how do you beat the wind? They got back on the river. They did great. They figured out the wind was the enemy. We got to figure out that the virus is the enemy. And until we figure that out, we're going to be yelling at each other. And just to Neil's point, sometimes it's just easier to retreat and not hear the silliness and the stupidness of the fight.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And if you think we sit around after trying to be in medicine for this long and make up facts, oh my God, seriously?
You're saying you have better things to do?
Yeah, you think I went way into debt to get through medical school. I went way into debt, and I didn't do that so I could sit around and make up facts. That's just dumb.
Hey, Deb wants to know, says my niece still has brain fog and fatigue after a year after COVID. She still just doesn't feel quite right. Should she get into the clinic? Should she reach out to a doctor? What should she do?
Yes, I think she should reach out to her physician. I will say we are, because of this acute surge we're having right now, our post-COVID clinic is kind of on hold, so to speak. So it may be best that she first reaches out to her physician, and then I think speech therapy has been seeing a lot of this brain fog, and potentially her physician could get to a speech pathologist.
So when do we know that we're in the long hauler phase? How many weeks, months past COVID is it time to start moving into a new phase?
Sure, probably when symptoms persist past 10 to 12 weeks is what we.
So about 3 months.
And just to say, I think this is also when you get a lot of disease, then what happens is, and it becomes a very common disease, it will shift from the realm of highly specialized care, and there will still be a role for highly specialized care, into the role of your primary care physician is going to become an expert at it, because they're going to see so much of it, they have to get better at it. And then you have to look for what are the specific modalities that this clinic can offer versus your primary care physician. Because right now, I think it's making this transition from a specialty disease to a primary care disease.
It really is. It really for most patients, I would say.
Yeah, and then we try and help the ones who struggle more than that.
Dr. Hawkinson, Elena wants to know, what are isolation guidelines anymore for just the general person or student? She says
Good luck with this one, Hawk.
she's finding mixed things online. Go figure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the best place to go for those isolation guidelines are going to be the CDC or KDHE if you live in Kansas, and certainly the Missouri Health Department if you live in Missouri. But in general, for the CDC isolation guidelines, I believe it's for vaccinated or unvaccinated, as if you test positive or develop symptoms, you should be isolated in your home for 5 days. After that 5 days, you are able to return back into society with mask use. But we would also caution here that if you can stay home and isolate for longer, that is still going to be safer to help reduce any further chance of spread as well. So that's kind of just the basics of the current isolation guidelines as recommended by the CDC.
Christy is asking, my niece with cancer still has some issues with smell and taste more than a year after getting COVID. What effect will her chemo have on those?
I'll have to say I do not know.
Okay. And that's a fair answer.
Do
You
you
can
have a
find
sense?
out.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine the chemotherapy itself would
On the long haul symptom?
would affect that. Again, typically for loss of smell, what you have is the inflammatory process or the infection, not necessarily of the nerves that help you to smell, but it's of those support cells around those nerves itself. I'm not sure that your chemo, you can certainly talk with your oncologist. I'm not sure the chemo would affect those cells per se, so I'm not sure it would have any effect. I'm not aware of, but I'm not an oncologist, I don't give chemotherapy. I'm not aware of typical chemotherapy really affecting taste and smell either for a positive or in a negative sense.
Deb is curious, for those who are not eligible for their booster yet, do they still have good protection against Omicron? Is everyone eligible for booster?
Hawk, what do you think?
I would say yes. Do you have antibody protection and neutralizing antibodies? Probably not to the higher levels that you would necessarily need. But as we started off early in the broadcast, we'd certainly say you should still have, and this is, again, that early basic science research from South Africa, you will still have, if you have an attacked immune system, you will still have a fairly good T-cell response to that to help protect you against severe disease and hospitalization. And as you get further out from those first 2 doses that you received, you are developing those immune responses, those antibodies as well. So your immune system is evolving. Those B cells and T cells are evolving to be creating those antibodies. You won't probably have the high neutralizing levels, but you will still have some response, especially of those T cells, even if you haven't yet received your booster dose.
I think what this question probably is, like, for somebody who's, let's say they're 4.5 months out,
Yeah.
so then they get Omicron, are they still going to be protected? And yeah, I think to Hawkeye's
Yeah.
exact
I would
point
say
is
yeah.
that you are really well protected for the first few months, and then it begins to go down. But both, especially with, I think, Pfizer and Moderna, and actually there's some good evidence that came out from the VA cooperative. There's a large VA cooperative study that came out last week that detailed the level of protection. I forgot how many. I wanted to say there were 45 or 50,000 veterans in it that looked at the differences between the J&J vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and the Moderna vaccine, and how well people did and related to the timing of their infection. It was mostly a Delta and Alpha wave at that point. And really found pretty darn good protection against severe illness and death with all three. There were slight differences between them. There's a bigger difference between the mRNA and the Johnson & Johnson. There's a little difference between Moderna and Pfizer, with Moderna being a little better in some categories. But at the end of the day, I think, Hawk, you're still well protected against severe illness and death, even after 4 months.
Yeah.
You may not be as well protected with hospitalization, and maybe you may get a little sicker the further out you get, but you're still pretty well protected against severe illness and death. And then you get the booster. The question we don't know is how long that booster fully lasts in the Omicron era. We just don't have it. We just have time has to go by yet. You listen to the CEOs of Moderna and Pfizer saying, well, we think we're going to need another shot. Moderna's folks are saying probably in the fall. Pfizer's folks haven't been just talking about the timing of it yet, but both Pfizer and Moderna are developing a vaccine aimed at Omicron. And I think if you were to sit back and look at it, I suspect the vaccine of the future is going to have, kind of like influenza vaccine, Hawkeye, it's going to have ways to stimulate your body for both Omicron as well as Alpha and Delta specifically.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. You know, what we have seen for almost the past 24 months now is that certain variants will come in and displace the other variants. I think that will continue. We saw when that South African variant, which I think was Gamma maybe, or Beta, I don't remember exactly which one.
There are a lot of Greek alphabets.
First identified in South Africa, I think it was B.1.351, whatever. That was a big concern, and so you had Moderna pivoting to create a spike with that variant spike. What happened to that? They're probably still studying it, but what we have seen and what we've heard, we've seen in the literature, we've heard Dr. Fauci talk about everybody, these vaccines that we have still right now are continuing to protect very well. The issue is if you start to develop a specific spike vaccine, probably by the time you're rolling it out, there is going to be a new variant that has now displaced that specific variant spike. So.
Couple more questions. Isaac wants to know, I know that shingles is caused by lingering chickenpox virus. Might long COVID be brought on by a similar process?
Mm-hmm. You know, so we don't have any evidence. So the viruses, chickenpox virus and SARS-CoV-2 are very different. We know that chickenpox can, essentially integrate or go into your nerve cells and be dormant. And then when you have, say, a stressor, you can get shingles from that. There is no evidence of that particular process, that same process within, for SARS-CoV-2. There is some basic science research. I don't remember the reference off the top of my head, but it did show a little bit of possibly continued viral, not necessarily viral replication, but some sort of transcription translation processes going on with the viral RNA and the proteins that may be leading to a continued long haul symptoms depending on what organ you're looking at. That is certainly plausible. There's also the thought that maybe when you get the vaccine, if you have long haul syndrome, that helps to reset things or increase that immune response to help clear it further. But there's no indication that you develop this latent type of infection such as with the chickenpox virus or with CMV or with HIV or anything like that.
Donna, just quickly, if you've had Delta, do you have any protection against Omicron?
I would say, I think there are a lot of layers to that question. As far as antibody protection, your body is going to be making specific antibodies toward Delta. Now, there is the possibility that you have improved any circulating B cells that are creating antibodies to Omicron based on previous vaccination. Were you vaccinated? We know that you will get a boost in your T cell responses. So I think that answer is somewhat complex. You probably will get a boost in those T cell responses to help with protection against severe disease and hospitalization. You probably won't get a boost in your specific neutralizing antibodies against Omicron, though.
One of the challenges, I think, in looking at the data is that the answer that's hard to know. So if you look at the South African data where 70% of the population had COVID, they'd had either the Alpha variant, the Delta variant, or whatever. So then when you say, well, Omicron was mild, right, it's mild in South Africa, but what we didn't know in the United States, and we still don't really know, and I think the answer is it is being more severe in the U.S., but in South Africa, that because so many people had the virus before, it was hard to, and they had a 43% vaccination rate. So when you looked at South Africa, they may have had protection either from prior infection or from this, and they'd had a lot of deaths already. So the people, you could argue the folks who were most susceptible, a lot of them had already died from the virus, so to speak. So then you come to the United States, you say, okay, of the unvaccinated population, what percentage had been infected? We don't know. You know, South Africa actually has a much better public health infrastructure because of the impact of AIDS in South Africa than we have in the United States. So they have a lot better information about how their population is doing as a whole. We don't have that because we gutted the public health measures for so long. And even now there are groups out there, you know, like making it almost impossible to be a public health officer in Missouri. So it's a difficult question to know the answer to, because what we don't know is whether or not in the U.S. population, how many people have actually either had COVID or been vaccinated, and how many people are completely naive, and what are those folks like? Here's what we do know. Hospitalizations in the U.S. are surging. They are going up, and that's not the same thing as what happened in some of the South African data. So I think we're going to have to, I think we have to step away from this and saying, you know, there may be some protection that's been given to you, but it's probably not perfect, and it's probably not permanent, that is from having had COVID-19 before. And you should be very wary of the Omicron. The other thing that you have to recognize is that Omicron has demonstrated an incredible vulnerability to us. The vulnerability is our own anger. And because we're so angry about this, we've had this virus rip through our population so rapidly when that did not have to happen. The thing that is our warning is that Omicron is probably not as severe as Delta. But imagine if Omicron had been really virulent as well. What would this weakness have brought to us? This fact that we want to treat each other as the enemy instead of the virus as the enemy. I think we should learn from this as opposed to trying to lie about it.
Dr. Hawkinson.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Stites brings up a great point there about previous infection. We're getting continued more information and basic science research looking at B and C T cell responses. When you look at B and T cell responses in those people that had previous infection, so convalescents is what we call them, convalescent patients, they don't have as good immune response as compared to somebody who, say, got 2 doses of the mRNA vaccines. Even those patients, though, seem to be a little bit less as far as B cell and T cell responses in the laboratory than those people that either had infection and then got vaccinated or had vaccine and then got infected. But that's not to say we should all run out and get the infection. I think that's a dangerous way to move, because anytime you do get the infection, you are rolling the dice with the complications. But just to show you that, in reference to that previous question, and what Dr. Stites was saying, we know vaccination continues to help. We also know that if you were infected, say with Delta or Alpha, you probably have some sort of hybrid immunity, and we've discussed that before on the show as well.
All right, we're going to wrap up, but Nicole wants to know, just real quick, is high blood pressure related to having COVID? Is that a long-haul symptom that we know of?
There are some studies suggesting that, yes, hypertension can be one of the risk factors, or COVID can be a risk factor for development of hypertension. So
And just
possibly, yes.
And just really quick, because we're going to have people ask how they get involved with our long-haul clinic. Can you just tell people the process of that?
To contact their primary care physician, and then their primary care physician or other physician can refer into our post-COVID clinic.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. We're going to get to our final thoughts today. And Anil, I want to go ahead and start with you. Again, thank you so much for joining us on the road. We're glad to see you back at work. You look good, and we appreciate you being with us daily on our show. And just what do you want the message to be to folks out in the community? What's your final thought?
Well, looking at the numbers as they come out every day, I think we become immune to those numbers after a while. And something to remember, I mean, I know my end of it's a little dramatic, but there's 25 or 30 people today that are going to go home and have a similar struggle, hopefully, if they go home. And, you know, the nursing staff obviously has been ravaged taking care of this. I would just encourage people, you know, to be kind. I mean, the last thing that people need to hear when they're trying to survive or figure out how to live again is to hear all of that drama, you know, and all of that, you know, all those attacks and all those things that just, you know, that they don't matter at this point in time. You know, and going forward, I would hope that people could just be kind going forward.
Well said. And we just want to say thank you and be well. And we appreciate you. And your story is very powerful. So thank you for sharing it with us. Dr. Spikes, final thoughts from you today.
So I completely agree with Dr. Stites. You know, the virus is our enemy. I also around in the intensive care unit. So I see both the very ill patients from COVID, and then I'm also seeing these post-COVID patients that maybe didn't have severe disease but are still struggling months later. So please protect yourself and everyone, and we are not the enemy. So please consider wearing your mask, get vaccinated, and I hope everyone stays safe.
Dr. Hawkinson.
I can't say it any better than our guest, Anil, and I would certainly agree with that. Be kind, and also please get vaccinated. If you're eligible for a booster, please get your booster.
Anil rocks.
Doesn't he?
I want to just say, you know, some of us would love to just say, beam me up, Scotty, I want out of this mess. But the reality is it's not that simple. And the only way out of it is through grace and compassion and what we've said before, faith, hope, and science. We don't help ourselves when we don't tell the truth.
All right. On that note, thank you all for being a part of this great discussion this morning. As we leave you today, one of our most common questions that we get here: which fully vaccinated people are most at risk of extreme illness or death? Alexis Del Cid got the answers from Dr. Chris Brown, one of the health system's hospitalists who cares for COVID patients.
Are there any specific factors that you're continually seeing when it comes to fully vaccinated adults still having severe or fatal outcomes when they catch COVID?
Older population, you know, greater than 65 years or older, immunocompromised, individuals with chronic pulmonary or lung disease, neurologic disease, kidney disease, liver disease, cardiovascular or heart disease, and or diabetics. But typically you will see one of those risk factors in regards to individuals who you see in hospitals with severe COVID-related illness and or death.
Are you seeing or hearing of any deaths or severe illness to people who are fully vaccinated and boosted under the age of 65 and have none of those other risk factors?
They actually looked at exactly what you're asking, meaning that they looked at a group of hospitals, about 460 plus hospitals, over the course of between December of 2020 to October 2021. And they identified about 1.2 million individuals who were considered fully vaccinated. Of those individuals who were fully vaccinated, all right, you're looking at about 2,200 contracted COVID. About 189, to be specific, actually had severe complications and or death. 37 of those individuals actually died. What they found was that all of those individuals with severe COVID-related symptoms and or death had at least one. Of the individuals that died, about 78% had 4 or more of those risk factors. So if it said nothing else, it really shows that vaccinations work to decrease hospitalization, severe illness, and death.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now everywhere podcasts are available.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this Best of Morning Medical Update. You can catch our live broadcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And don't forget, you can always email us at medicalnewsnetwork@kumc.edu or reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We will be back to our live shows 5 days a week starting September 6th. So please go out, make it a great day.